All right. Hello. Welcome to week something. I don't remember of your Tufts capstone project. The week after spring break. I hope you had a restful week. And what's basically the only thing on the that I've put on the agenda is like, what's up? What do you have going on with the project? There was some stuff at the end of the week before break that you said you wanted to get started on. You shared some documents with us for feedback. Just kind of checking in on like what's your progress on that stuff? What can we help you out with? What can we give you feedback on? That sort of thing.
Yeah. First of all, thank you for all of the comments on our feedback plan. So um like for last week we completed the research, wrapped up the all of the research and did like a usability feedback and like our like low fidelity prototypes. This week we started, oh, and we also sent out the screener. I think Gina sent it out. Like, thank you so much. For this week we did like a higher fidelity, not really like medium fidelity storyboard of our two features, and we were writing the script for our first round of user testing, which is to be done by Friday. For today, we wanted to get like some feedback on our kind of like wireframes and also like discuss about how we should go about our like um user testing. I think in our like brief or like in the plan last week, we were talking about how the first round we wanted to compare the original with feature one and then the original with feature two. But to kind of do both features in like an interview with one person, it would definitely be more than 30 minutes or like it would take too long. So we did talk with Linda too about how we should do it, and she said that like maybe like not compare it with the original and just kind of like do like a concept test kind of. So yeah, we wanted to show you guys our prototype for the feature that we have right now and kind of talk about many the different ways we could do the usability test.
Great.
I can share my screen as well to show us our um, storyboard. Can you all see my screen?
Yes.
Okay.
I,
So you can. Yeah.
I was
Did
saying I could explain the pin up if you want me to, Anwaya, since
yeah.
yeah. So if you could zoom in a little bit on the first screen. So the idea of the pinup is like one of the things that was mentioned in the user interviews is sometimes the description on the top is not updated. And so people have to go through the thread and like get more context and see what's already been done. And so this just shows like how in the description, this probably isn't the best example, but in the description it says that they want on a right click um to have like a menu option. Wait, what is it? On right has menu option to explain the output. Like basically on the terminal, you can right click and it'll explain what it is. And then um back in the description, if you can zoom in a little bit more, oh yeah. Um, like basically they're going to more detail about whether that is possible and they might need to do a workaround. And then if you move on to the second screen, um, so like the idea is that anyone would be able to highlight a part of the discussion, right click, and then pin it to the description. Um, and that way, whoever is onboarding can know about the most updated version of how the project is going. And then if you go to the next one, like once you right click, there's you create a name for the pin, and then there's like an optional description if you want to add more additional information. And then if you click save, basically there is a section that's called pins in the description, and then it um, pins it up there. And then if you click on the pin icon, and it scrolls down to the bottom where it was mentioned. So that's basically the main idea of the pin feature.
Can I ask a question on that? I think it's really cool, but I have one question.
Mm-hmm.
Does everybody have their own views of pins? Like if I pin certain things, would you also see it if you came to the issue?
Yeah. So the idea is like anyone can pin stuff. So when someone else is onboarded, they know like what the team has already highlighted as this is important to read in the discussion.
Okay. Okay.
Well, a question to that is one thing that kind of came to mind is how do we prevent this from being another issue? Doesn't
Right.
have so many pins that it becomes like everyone's thoughts and like it's like a comment on a comment. So how is there a way to limit number of pins, or is there a way to even filter it out, maybe even roles and permissions? Just thinking through how would we solve the issue of it not becoming another thing to read on top of everything?
Yeah, that was also something we were discussing, like who maybe one way to control it is like only certain people, maybe just the PM can pin things. Um, but yeah, that's a good idea. Good point.
I think approaching it from a kind of a user problem, right? So it's like if we're looking at a product manager, the problem would be I would have to go in again. So that's like an additional pain point that I would have to address. So it's kind of like doubling my work, where it's like I introduce something and then I have to go back in the discussion and then look at it again. So maybe the user problem here is how do you kind of let the process happen organically without another human in the loop intervention.
Yeah. I think another thing we're worried about is like how much easier is this than just going in and updating the description on the top. Yeah. And we can also look at the second idea too with the do you want to explain this one?
Yeah, so the second idea is like someone new to the team and then they are getting pinned by another person. In this scenario, it is the product manager. But the problem is they have no like previous background context on the issue being mentioned, and the discussion is really lengthy, which makes it difficult to understand. So to really fully understand the issue, that person has to like really dig through the discussions and also the related issues in order to understand the issue, which is really time consuming. So our idea is to have sort of like a link tree feature where we can see like how every issue is related to each other. So in this case, instead of like showing like in the original issue part, they have like the text with the link to that issue, but in our new proposed feature we want it to like be a sort of like a link list or tree where we can see like how issue is dependent on another. And when clicking on, for example, clicking onto one of the relevant issue, they can be directed to the other issue. And in this case, if you zoom in, you can see like the name, status, and milestone of that issue. And when clicking onto that, like you will be prompted to the related issue, and you have the sort of like banner at the top where you can navigate back to the original issue that is like the parent to that child issue here. And that is basically the gist of that feature. just to give the user like sort of an idea of how the relationships among these issues.
Is the idea that this would be like an alternate view format for like the child items and related items lists? Like something I could toggle between like the current view and this view, or would it be a different thing or
We're thinking like it can be like a toggle between like the current and then the like the view like right here, because like as being mentioned like in the previous meetings, like we don't want it to be like a completely new like feature, but just like something to enhance the current issue bar.
I really
and
lo-
oh
Go ahead,
sorry.
Chad.
No, go ahead.
I was going to say, I really love the visual element of this. I think amidst text, a visual element would be good. I think there are some things that we can think through in the future from like a technical, like loading perspective and making sure everything kind of presents itself. But what would be a new, would this just be turning it into a visual, or would we add another object to reference? Would it be referencing a comment? Would it be referencing the description? How are you thinking of the actual hierarchy of linked items?
Right now we're thinking like just like the issues, like the bigger issue block instead of like the so for example, like in the previous feature that we proposed, like in the description, it's like showing the like mentions within that issue, but then for this feature we want to like be broader and then showing the relationships between different related issue blocks, if that makes sense.
Yeah, we also thought about kind of showing like the urgency or like how closely related the merge requests are, because I think the comments we got from our interviews is that like sometimes they're working on it and like they find out that it depends on another like kind of issue. So like showing the relationship and showing kind of like how closely related they are would like notify the person onboarding whether like they should um like fix something first or like move forward with the current one they're doing.
Another idea we're talking about is, since we got feedback that when they look through the comment thread, like one of the first things they look for are like related issues that are linked, that maybe in like the linked items diagram, there's like if you hover over it, it like mentions where like where that issue was mentioned in the thread, and it could like hop over to that. But yeah, just something we were thinking of.
Was there anything in the research that would indicate anything where, so right now we just have buckets, right? We have child items that you can create. We have your linked items, which or relates to can be really anything. We also have blocked by, and then we have like the related merge request. Would this be kind of putting those more up for surface?
What do you mean by that, Dasha?
I think I'm getting to, is this a different visual of the current linked items and related merge requests and kind of how they're sequenced? Or more of a direct, this is what's blocking and you cannot start work? More of is the user problem that this is solving more of you can't start work because this is blocked by this? Or is this more of a visualization of here's everything that's there and how everything relates to each other?
I guess we were thinking of just having how issues are related to each other, but now that we're talking about it, it does seem maybe it's a good idea to like show more explicitly if like if another issue needs to be completed before yours, like highlighting that, because right now I think it's only in the banner if you dig a little bit deeper. Yeah.
Yeah, I think the concept is fantastic. I would just challenge you to think through maybe if there is something visual that you can add to it to kind of give a quick view of like, all's good, you're ready to do the issue, or if you can incorporate some of the elements that exist, whether it relates to it's blocked by with visual colors. As a product manager, I tend to solution, so my UX peers, please stop me. But it's one of those just think about through if we are adding a visual element, how can we quickly look at it to say, I'm good to work on this versus, ooh, still blocked.
Yeah.
One thing to bear in mind with that is that there are other data mechanisms on issues that indicate whether they're blocked or not. And I think that there is parallel work going on in the plan team around work item statuses that will make it really clear up at the top before you look at anything, this is blocked or not. So like the kind of binary, like this is blocked or this is good to go, may not be an important thing to focus on with this, right? Because I think the problem that you're starting from on this project is like, I'm new to this issue, I'm getting onboarded. How do I quickly find out what like the current state of things is? And the issue itself should be telling you I am blocked or not, because someone like basically if the issue is known to be blocked, then it will already be indicated in some way. Whereas like discussions about like implementation details or the finer aspects of like what the design actually is, those may be the things where like someone's digging through a bunch of comment threads to try to like suss out the current state of things. I do think something that's a really interesting opportunity with what you're doing with related or linked items is that right now, and I don't know if the plan team has any plans around this. Right now, the linked items is only like explicit, I think. So if I mention an issue in the comments, it doesn't just automatically show up in the linked items section on an issue, which is different from merge request because on merge request it does actually get linked just by mentioning the issue in a comment on the merge request. So I think, there's an opportunity for you to kind of explore like a broader like connectedness network kind of thing. Because in the like little drawing that you have there, it's in the child items. So obviously it's a little bit different because child items is going to be a tree where the issue you're on right now is like the root node. But if it's a related items, then the issue you're looking at is a node somewhere in the tree, right? And there's a lot of interesting like upstream stuff that may be related that there may not be any explicit stuff mentioning in the description or even possibly in the comments. Like something might link to another epic in a comment, and then you say, oh, well, yeah, I guess this is related to that epic, and that epic has a lot of stuff in it. And exploring that tree could be really interesting. Now, granted, this is also related to a comment that Dasha made earlier, where it's like, oh, maybe this is just like another big thing I triage through. Maybe there's this huge, like, like tree diagram, and now I'm just like zooming way out and being like, wow, this is related to all these other things. I'm gonna dig in on all of them, and then like 3 hours later, I still don't really know what's going on with this issue, but I've learned a lot about like adjacent stuff. So there's obviously, trade-offs and pitfalls there as well, but.
I think if we don't like, because I feel like we've gone through the both features, I don't know if we want to move on to kind of our plan for user testing and kind of get feedback on that. Moya, if you want to like scroll down, I think we just had like the two questions that we wanted to focus on at like the bottom.
You go more towards the left.
Yeah, there you go. Which honestly, it was kind of interesting because we had been working on all of this during like our group time earlier this week, and then we got to the portion of like lecture where Linda was walking us through kind of how to do user testing. So I feel like our original plan that you guys saw in the brief that we had sent before spring break, I think we'll definitely have a shift. Because originally we wanted to just, do the test both features and then see which one of the two we wanted to go forward with. And then originally to do that, we wanted to like ask mainly these two questions here, ask them for each feature, and that way we could have more um, quantifiable like results in terms of how difficult they found navigating each feature and then which one they felt would be better for their workflow. But after Linda giving us some tips on how to do the user research, and I know Moya mentioned this earlier too, it would be more of like a concept testing of like having the user go through using our feature. So like basically assuming that our feature would already be used, and then asking more probing questions to see what why they made certain choices, whether like, and then that way we can see maybe what we want to add, and then also what about our current design works and doesn't work. But we wanted to get your feedback on that. Like, should we, I don't know, how to like balance, I guess, like the quantifiable stuff, but versus like the more, because the probing questions are still more qualitative information. So yeah, I don't know if you guys had any thoughts on that.
There's definitely a place um in solution validation for a Likert scale, these kind of like scale of 1 to 5 thing. But it can be difficult to do it in a way where you're not just kind of accidentally asking the person like, do you like me and want to help me out on this project, which is like not going to give you any usable data, so like I definitely think the more tied to a concrete thing where they don't feel like there's any where the person answering the question doesn't feel like they're making any value judgment, they feel like you're just answering an objective question, the better the data will be for you to operate on. So like how would you rate the difficulty of navigating this feature? Like that's like it's a little squishy, so I do think that it's good if you're thinking about moving towards something that's more concrete on that, like yeah, it can also be difficult to evaluate this kind of thing on the participants' side when it is just a clickable prototype. There's just like something in your brain when you're using a clickable prototype where you're like, well, this isn't real. I'm like, whatever, yeah, sure, I guess that was fine. But then if you tried to use the exact same functionality that worked exactly the same way in the real world, you'd be like, oh, wait a minute, this part doesn't work at all for my thing. So trying to tie it to like a concrete task that they can visualize themselves actually doing, and because like navigate is like, oh, it could be, whatever, and difficulty is also like kind of
Mhm.
vague as well. And then predicted efficiency again is also like I think you'd have to give them a very specific task that they can actually accomplish through the clickable prototype. Um, to see kind of how efficient they feel it was, or something like that. But even then, there may be different ways of measuring their efficiency. You could not tell them you're going to do this, but measure how long it takes them to do it, or how many things they look at first, or how many things they click on first, or how much they scroll first, or that sort of thing to try to measure that.
Mm.
Because
Yeah.
I don't think that yeah, I don't think that user sentiment is really going to be an important data point necessarily in this.
Hmm. I did want to ask because I think, yeah, in terms of the tasks that we would give the participant, maybe if you can like scroll just slightly above, um, I think we were kind of also struggling on figuring out like what tasks to give them that wasn't just like almost like go through our prototype. So the one that we had come up with for the pinned one was finding the task would be like to find the conclusion or like the most recent update of the issue that we present to them. Um, and so do you think like that would be an appropriate, like almost specific enough task without being too broad? Like providing enough direction, basically, like just say like find the conclusion and then through that tracking those, how long it takes them to do, where they go first, based on our feature.
Yeah, like it's just one more thing to add on that. Like we weren't sure if like the task should be actually pinning the feature or like reading the thread after it's already been pinned, which is like the perspective of someone who's onboarding.
Mhm. Yeah, it is interesting because going back to Dash's comment earlier, this is like a two-sided thing. This is a curation and consumption thing. So you have introduced this thing where basically you need to make sure it works for people on both sides of that interaction. The original problem that you're working on is the person consuming this information. So I would try to focus on making sure that you're solving the problem for the person who needs to learn what's up with this issue. But yeah, I think definitely with this pinning functionality, you've introduced a situation where you need people to pin. You need it to be a natural and easy and an action people want to do to pin in order for the person on the consuming side to get that information and benefit from it. So, I mean, I think that the primary thing you're trying to answer is like, if these pinned things exist, does it actually help with the problem that you're looking for? So I would try to focus on that, but then you do basically have an additional thing that you need to figure out and verify, which is like this behavior of pinning stuff. Does it work? Do people do it? Because if nobody does it, then it's not going to solve your original problem.
Yeah, and you can approach it also as I hate to say binary, but more like a pass fail. Like, is this saving you time? If you were to incorporate and do like an A/B test, like here's an issue without anything pinned, and here is an issue that has things pinned, like does this save you time? And then if you notice that they're actually going to the pinned issue and actually reading everything and then reading the pins, then you'll have a better answer there. That's just a hypothesis, but I think maybe having a very specific, does this save you time when looking at an issue, could be a little bit more objective. Well, subjective, but objective in the efficacy of the pin.
No, yeah, that definitely makes sense.
I think if you focus on the consuming side as well, I bet you they will give feedback or ask a lot of questions around how those pins are created in the first place. I think that discussion will just come naturally anyways. So if you, depending on what you can prioritize with the time that you have, that could always just be like a discussion portion.
Yeah.
Or I was gonna say, I think back to the time thing, it's like I think both of these by them or both features by themselves could definitely take up the full 30 minutes, because then even going to our navigation or the visual board, I feel like coming up with a task for that one was a little more almost like straightforward, in the sense that like we knew all of it would be almost concept testing. So basically like we would say like just basically asking them like, where would you go to find additional information when you are just looking at an issue? And through that, it's more straightforward, in the sense of like we know we'll just be looking at their behavior, and like asking the probing questions there. But I know we mentioned this like earlier in the meeting, but it's kind of like, should we just like have cutoff times for ourselves for each feature, and just like the information that we get is the information that we get?
We could, I'm just putting this out there. We are able to have sessions that are longer than 30 minutes. We can do hour, we can do a 45 minutes. If there's a time that you think would work better for you to be able to run this in the way that you want to, just let us know and we can update the recruiting.
Okay, yes.
I think this is also a thing where, like, if you had infinite participants, then you could just say, oh, some people will talk about the front side, some people will talk about the back side of it. I think that obviously it's maybe not as like satisfying for you if this happens. But if you do find that, like, it would be helpful on the consuming side if there were these pinned comments, that's still a good finding. Even if you haven't figured out like the right way for the creation mechanism to happen, that's still a good finding to move forward with, because you know, then it's like, okay, fine. But like if we can get to this point, we know that that will help people understand things faster. And then, you know, it's kind of like a separate follow-up project really to figure out how do you make it natural to get these pinned comments in there. So like, you know, I think from what Linda has said and from past projects, I think that she would still be satisfied if you like came up with like, yeah, this would be great if this existed. We don't know the mechanism for getting it in there yet because we're time boxing all this stuff. So don't be too worried about like, oh, we have to do like twice as much work now for this. However, you know, bearing that in mind, that may help you decide between these two pathways as well, because one of them is stemming from data that already exists and is already getting added naturally, and one of them is a manual curation. But you could also look at possible ways of using the data that exists now to suggest relevant comments or whatever. It would just, you would have to, you know, you'd have to talk to people, see what the data tells you about where to find this stuff and what would be useful for users.
I think another quick thing to add is perhaps asking the user how would they define pinning, right? So like that can also guide you into thinking like what is their expectation of the feature. And that can kind of maybe even lead if you have, not to say you should have multiple scripts, but kind of maybe that'll lead you to different questions. So for instance, if a developer says, oh, I expect pins to only be done by X person, like my EM and PM, that sets you up for a different set of questions that they would need to orient themselves. So maybe asking like, what does pinning mean to them? Is it done automatically by just a script, or is it done by humans? Will kind of help you understand what their headspace is and how they look at pinning. I think people will have different answers. I'll be really curious to see how people think about what is pinning.
Yeah, I think, or I was just gonna say, like, I think when it comes to the figuring out the script, it's definitely gonna be like a lot, like we've already established this, but like definitely honing in on that looser rather than like sticking to something. But yeah.
We might have touched on this already, but what are your guys' thoughts on like only testing like our two different features versus the two different features and then having an original as a comparison?
I think that in an ideal world, we would have the time and the participants to be able to set that baseline. Because it does make your findings on your prototypes, I think, more powerful if you can show that the same task happens faster or with fewer questions or with less ambiguity or whatever in your prototype versus the current version. I think that if you can make the task small enough, you may be able to get two of them in to a single testing session. And like Gina said, we could also work on getting you like longer testing sessions with people for this. I think also if you were able to get enough participants, you could have some do current and some do new. And you're not comparing the same person, so there may be differences in like aptitude or just their mood that day or whether they've had lunch yet or whatever that would be, complicating factors. But you could maybe see a trend in like the people who do the current version, it takes about this long, whereas people who do our version, it's like much quicker or whatever. But that's, there's a resource limiter on that, right? So you have to have enough people to be able to split them out into different cohorts for that.
If you do decide if you want to increase the time for the sessions and you do want to show current version and then your prototype, one thing I would recommend is swapping the order for participants on which prototype you show first. So if you like start with the current version for one participant, then you would show prototype one, prototype A first. The next participant, you would show prototype B instead of A. Just assuming that that's assuming you would show both prototypes in a single session. So yeah, that's one thing to keep in mind if you do end up going that route. But I agree with Chad that I think it would make your results more powerful if you're able to actually compare that data.
That's a really good point, Gina, is you don't want to like kind of like give the game away to the participant that like first we're going to look at the way it works today. Now let's look at the new one. What do you think about that? Like you don't want them to know which is which basically, and changing the order between participants, and also never saying like you basically want to present them like these are two different things we're thinking about doing, so that they don't get kind of biased about them.
Yeah, I agree both with Chad and Gina. And if you're going to this route, like maybe if that helps saving your time, maybe you can just make it like more low fidelity. I think that's also totally fine because you also need to create a prototype for the current version of GitLab issue. So yeah, it's just really up to you. Like it always doesn't need to be like super pixel perfect high fidelity prototype.
Yeah, the both sides nature of the pinning does it does give you a lot more work to do.
Yeah, I mean, I think we mentioned this too at some point, but Linda did just suggest like for a matter of time saving, go with the assumption that your feature will be used. So instead of like testing will it be used or will it not be used. So I think like that might be what we'll be going with. But
Yeah, I you know, I think that testing the consuming side of the pinning and getting verification that that will or will not be an improvement is movement forward. And I think that it was a smart point on Dasha's part to say that like you can ask people who you're testing the consuming about basically like how do you think these got here? Who do you think did this? Who do you think should be doing this? And you can get some data about that from the person who you're trying to test whether or not the existence of it would be useful for.
Maybe like if we do the pinning, like this round, we just test like if the pinning, seeing the pins is helpful, and then second round we can test like how the pins, the mechanism of how it gets up there.
Yeah, I mean, I would say, you know, you've set your direction already on like I want to make it faster and easier for someone who's like new to an issue to like get what's going on with it. Don't get pulled off track because you're realizing, oh wait, there's like a different activity someone else needs to do in order to support this behavior. Like make sure you're working on that. And then, you know, you're going to have some findings and suggestions about like any activities that are needed in order to make that data be in place that can be part of kind of basically like, you know, a discussion or like for further research section in whatever your final presentation is. You know, I don't think you have to do, you know, it's time boxed and whatever. So like you don't have to do the whole thing. I think you can say like we've got some indications that like this is probably the way it should work, but further research is needed. And maybe even like here are questions that we don't have answers for about that part of the functionality that need further research kind of thing. You know, I think that's like a thing that happens in the real world also, you know, is like coming out with like, well, we don't have this part fully figured out, but here's the parts of it we do know about. Here's some hypotheses we have, and here's like, here's the specific open questions that we would want to do more research about on that. I think that's a perfectly valid part of the deliverable.
Yeah. And like since the goal of this round of testing is being able to choose which feature we want to move forward with, like is there anything you guys think we should include in our testing to make that decision easier and being able to compare which feature?
Yeah, I mean, I think that to the extent that you can, I think having like objective data is going to make it the easiest if you're you know, like comparing because they're like different things, but to the extent that you can make make it so that someone is trying to achieve the same thing with both of them and see which one can do it faster or in the fewest steps or with the fewest questions or whatever, I think should be what helps you with it. Because they're fairly different functionalities, you know? So yeah, I think that the more you can try to like measure something concrete about it and make sure that like what your end goal of like it's like a person is able to like onboard to the issue faster and like quickly accurately understand what's up with this issue. um just like try to figure out a way to measure which one of these two pathways will do that better.
Like, should we have like a mock issue and then oh, like the task would be for them to kind of give a summary of what they think the issue is, or yeah, I don't.
Yeah, it could be. You know, I think that the problem scenario here seems to be basically the description is outdated, right? The description is what it is. The description has useful information, but there's more current stuff about this current state of the issue in the comments. That, well, you know what though? Like that really only works for your pins. Because for the other one where you're like kind of giving a visual exploration of the relationships between issues, that's not going to help with the description is outdated, but there's more stuff in the comments, right?
Yeah.
So they are kind of almost like covering different aspects of the same larger problem, because I think with your second concept, I guess the additional information that you need to be able to glean about stuff is more derived from its relation to other ongoing work. So yeah, I don't know what exact question you could pose to someone where like they could come up with the same answer but find it through these two different pathways.
One other thing that would make it a little bit easier for you is the project we shared with you on GitLab that Chad shared in the beginning of this. You all have access to, so if you don't want to mock up an issue in Figma, you could just have them, you could give them access. We can help you with this. You can give the participant access to that project so that they can just go in and actually see the current experience of an issue without, it's less work on your plate. You just have to make sure that it has the things that you want it to have with whatever the mock data is.
Yeah, but I think for that case, like the prototype should be high fidelity in the end.
Yeah,
Yeah.
You would want
Yeah.
the instances to be at the same.
Yeah. Yeah. I think whatever like that you think it saves you time is the best.
You know, I think something to dig into with kind of figuring out a scenario where you can kind of test both of these things is like I would go back to the interviews you've done and look for examples in what they talked about. Like look for concrete examples that you can take and like make like a genericized version of it within your prototype. Because then you're testing like a real problem that a real user pointed out and seeing whether or not your solution makes that better. And there may be a scenario from one of those interviews where both of these pathways could just as easily be a solution to it. But definitely like, you know, taking some work off of yourself to have to like come up with the perfect thing. You know, you already had people talk to you about like real problems that they've come up against and like they've shared their screen and showed you like it's like this. So hopefully one of those would be a good candidate for a testing scenario.
Yeah. Yeah, maybe the test scenario is like the pins are someone mentioning a linked issue and like, hey, you should check this out. And then, yeah, I don't know. Maybe that's similar enough with the tree of issues.
Could be. I do also want to put it out there that like if you don't think that there is a scenario where both of these equally apply, what does that mean? And that's not a leading question. I don't know what it means. But what it like it's up to you to figure out what does that mean for the state of your project and like are these actually equal solutions? Or are they solving slightly different things? If so, what does that mean? Like maybe these are separate problems that are kind of parts of the same larger problem. And maybe one of them is more severe than the other. Maybe you don't, what do I mean to say? Maybe it's okay that it's not apples to apples. They're like both fruit. You're solving a fruit problem, but like oranges are actually more urgent, you know? Like that could be the case too. Like you don't have to like, like run yourself ragged trying to find some scenario where both of these different pathways could equally solve it. Like maybe they are different sub problems of the same broad problem, and maybe one of them is a more broadly applicable or more urgent or whatever thing to solve. So, bear that in mind as you're thinking about these as well.
Yeah. What do you think about asking the users directly, like which feature do you think would you want in your, if you had to pick one, would you want?
I think as long as it's right at the end, it's probably okay. I wouldn't put a lot of weight on what they say because what they say is going to be subjective, personal opinion that's based on like a pretty brief interaction with a prototype of currently unknown fidelity. But it's interesting, I think that if everybody has the same answer, that becomes more relevant, like if it's kind of noisy, if it's like about 50-50, then well, you didn't spend that much time on the questions. It doesn't really matter, right? It's the last thing you asked, and opinion was split. And opinion being split can be something that basically goes in the lab report, right? It's like we asked people, and people kind of felt like toss up about it, which could mean a lot of things. It could mean they're both great. It could mean they're both not very effective. It could mean that people don't feel strongly about it, but think that whatever. So yeah, I think it's probably okay. Just make sure it's at the end because you don't want to like color their perception of anything with that.
Yeah.
Yeah, and then make sure to just ask why, because I think like no matter what they just like say, I prefer this or that, I think the reasoning here may be more important.
Yeah, that absolutely. Anytime you ask someone for that sort of thing, the why is going to be where the meat is. And even if you build in a little bit of extra time to ask why about the why, you might find something really interesting.
I did have a question, like more general, not necessarily related to our project. So it's like if we had things more on the project, like feel free to um ask that too. But because I don't know, through like our this conversation and stuff, I was just thinking like I obviously all our findings, like, and you've said, or you guys have said this before, where it's like even if we find that like our feature isn't the helpful thing, that like that's useful information in and of itself. But I'm just curious, have you guys like, because I'm assuming like any information, any time that you spend on like research and like a feature and stuff, that it's like valuable information. But have you ever had a case just like in your general
Who
time working where it's like time used, do you feel?
think kind of both. Like I have done user research that led me to go back to the PM and say, we shouldn't do this. Which was a valuable use of my time, but also meant that like the solution I was working on was not a valuable thing for us to spend more time on. I think that the the way that teams are staffed, there's usually, I mean, not that this is necessarily a good thing, but there's usually one or fewer than one design resources on a team. There are many engineers. So if you spend a lot of your one person time, within like a sprint or whatever, figuring out that like the rest of the team shouldn't spend an entire sprint on this, that's valuable information. And I think it depends a lot on like soft skills and where you are in your career, how comfortable you feel going to someone and saying like the thing you want to do, don't do it. And here's why. But like letting the data guide you is like, it's like you can't, there's no trump card on like, well, the data says so. I mean, there is, people could say, I don't care, I'm going to do it anyway, but you were right. And like later on, like essentially the data's got your back, right? You can say, well, I said that we shouldn't do this. And look, I was right, So yeah, I think that's why, a finding that's like, actually, here are the concrete reasons the data says that this is not a good solution. And possibly here are a few things we found along the way that are interesting that we should dig into more. I think it's a totally valid research output.
Add to that, I think that's probably on the business side, what's one of the most important things to articulate to our stakeholders and to our customers, customers in different conversation, but more of, hey, I'll give you a scenario. Let's say we have a large customer who thinks this is a pain point, and we need to isolate whether it's an organizational problem at their end, because everybody has a different process, or is this truly a problem that every customer and every user is facing, or a large majority? And if your findings are, nope, it's actually and usually the customer or whoever has a bit of a solution for you. And let's say you're going through solution validation, you're like, actually, like this is too complex and this will not work across the organization. To Chad's point, we wouldn't build that because there's not enough of value in it and we can't justify that. So when, our chief product officer asks, it's like, oh, what happened to this customer that has a large, let's say, ARR with us, and did we ever implement it? We can point to the user research and they can see like, oh, yeah, that wouldn't work across all of these other sectors or across these other users because they actually don't feel that strongly about it. And so it almost disqualifies it as maybe a specific problem or a way to solve it. As a product manager, it just gives me more information. I don't want to say ammunition, but it does give me a lot more standing to say, hey, look, this isn't going to be worth our time and we need to work on something else. And that's super valuable because you'll never get that time back if you do move forward with it. Like real life scenarios we do face where it's like, should we spend time on this? And you're like, no, here's the user research that we have. And they are very clearly found that this is not something that we should do. Or on the opposite side, like this is super underserved. Chad's part of the paper cuts team and they find issues all the time that you're like, this needs to be solved. And a lot of users are saying this is painful. So you can go both ways.
And some advanced designer judo is your research says we shouldn't do this, and there are business reasons TM that it gets done anyway. The job for you then becomes, how do I make this somehow useful and also take the team the least amount of time to build, because this is not actually going to move the needle, but like, is there something I can change about it that will make something better for somebody? And how can I make this take like the fewest engineering resources? Because this is actually kind of a waste of time. Like that's where you start earning your black belt, I think, is when you can do that kind of turnaround, because that definitely will happen in your career. You will get handed a thing that's a real stinker. You're getting handed a lemon and say like, we have to do this, make design for it that goes. That's where you have to pull the handkerchiefs out of your sleeve a little bit with it, to figure out like, okay, well, where is there any value in this, even though like I don't think overall it's like a successful project. But you're not doing that part for this. For this, you're doing the upfront part, which is like, we've got a concept, we're going to test it. But you'd like legitimately wherever you come down on it, like it seems quite clear to me from talking with Linda and from things that I've seen in past projects, that like your grade is not dependent on this being a situation where you can say, hey, look, this is better. Your grade is dependent on going through the process, going through the steps, doing the work. So don't be too worried if you come up with like these both seem kind of equal, but like we didn't see a huge improvement over the baseline kind of thing. You still did all the work. Obviously, everybody wants it to be a knock out of the park. We have a few minutes left. Anything else we should check on? What do you what are you planning on doing between now and next week? Anything that we can support you in that with? Obviously this stuff, you know, between now and next week, but
Yeah. We plan to finish the like draft of our script by Friday, and then we'll send it over to you guys so we can make like adjustments before we actually start our testing. And we'll be working on like making the prototype as well before we start next week.
And can you also let us know within, I guess by when you send over your script, what how long you want your sessions to be, if you want them to be more than 30 minutes, please.
cool. All right. Well, welcome back. And we'll see you next week.
Thank you for your guys' feedback. Bye.
Bye everybody.